Ladies and gentlemen, we are living in a time unlike any other. The signs are no longer subtle. They are loud, clear, and undeniable. Our world is shaking on every front morally, spiritually, economically, and politically. What once felt stable now feels fragile. What once seemed distant now feels dangerously close. And yet, many continue to live as though nothing is happening, as if the warning sirens blaring around us are nothing more than background noise. The signs of global instability are no longer hidden. Around the world, there is a growing sense of unease that transcends borders, cultures, and political ideologies. From economic uncertainty to civil unrest, from environmental catastrophes to military conflicts, the evidence of a world in turmoil is mounting. People feel it in their daily lives. News headlines scream of inflation, rising interest rates, unstable markets, and the failure of global supply chains. Nations that were once considered economic powerhouses are now grappling with debt, deficits, and political divisions that seem irreparable. The average citizen is feeling the pressure. Families are struggling to pay bills, buy food, and find peace in their homes. The cost of living continues to rise while the value of currency diminishes. Trust in leadership is eroding, and citizens everywhere are beginning to question whether those in power truly have their best interests at heart. This isn't just about the economy. It's about the soul of nations being shaken. Countries that once stood on firm values are drifting into moral confusion and chaos. Laws are being passed that contradict basic principles of right and wrong. Societies are normalizing what was once considered destructive, and those who speak up are often silenced or shamed. This shift in values isn't just cultural, it's deeply spiritual. People are searching for meaning, hope, and direction in a world that increasingly offers none. Depression, anxiety, and hopelessness are on the rise, especially among young people. Suicide rates are climbing, and the fabric of society is tearing at the seams. In the geopolitical arena, tensions are escalating, conflicts between nations are intensifying, and the threat of global war is no longer just a theory whispered in the background. It's a possibility acknowledged by military leaders and analysts around the world. Alliances are shifting, new powers are rising, and old ones are faltering. The delicate balance of global power is tilting, and with it comes the risk of unprecedented conflict. Nations are stockpiling weapons, conducting military drills, and speaking in tones that suggest confrontation is not only likely, it may be imminent. Natural disasters are another warning sign that can't be ignored. Earthquakes, wildfires, floods, hurricanes, these events are increasing in frequency and severity. Communities are being displaced, crops destroyed, and lives lost. Scientists may call it climate change, but regardless of the terminology, the message is clear. The earth itself is groaning under the weight of corruption, negligence, and abuse. These disasters are no longer isolated incidents. They are becoming global patterns that disrupt the flow of life, challenge our preparedness, and call into question the sustainability of how we are living. Technological advancement, while a blessing in many ways, has also become a source of concern. Artificial intelligence, surveillance, and data control are becoming tools of dominance rather than development. Privacy is vanishing, and with it, the freedom to live without constant observation. Digital currencies and centralized control are raising alarms about the future of personal autonomy. Technology that once promised convenience now threatens liberty. The rapid pace of change is leaving people behind and creating divides that only deepen the existing fractures in society. At the same time, the global population is experiencing a loss of trust in institutions, governments, media, education, and even religious organizations. Scandals, misinformation, corruption, and hypocrisy have tainted the public's confidence. What happens when the people no longer believe in those appointed to lead them? What happens when authority loses its moral credibility? This vacuum creates space for chose, rebellion, and extremism. In such a climate, fear grows and manipulation thrives. In the financial world, central banks and international organizations attempt to maintain control, but their strategies are failing. Printing more money, manipulating interest rates, and inflating markets have only delayed the inevitable. The global debt is unsustainable, and the system is nearing a tipping point. History shows that every empire has a breaking point, a moment when the weight of its own excess becomes too great to bear. When currencies collapse, chaos follows. When people lose faith in money, they look for alternatives, some legal, some dangerous. The warning signs are everywhere. They are not hiding in the shadows, they are out in the open. The world is being shaken on every level: economic, political, environmental, and spiritual. The question is not whether instability exists. It does. The question is whether we are willing to see it for what it is. Denial won't make the storm go away. Ignoring the tremors won't prevent the earthquake. Moral and spiritual foundations are rapidly eroding in today's world. What once served as the cornerstone of societies, principles of right and wrong, truth and integrity, faith and accountability, is now being dismantled piece by piece. We live in a time where moral clarity has been replaced with moral confusion. What was once considered immoral is now celebrated, and what was once upheld as virtuous is now ridiculed or rejected. In this reversal of values, truth has become subjective, and every person claims their own version of it, often without any standard to measure it by. This shift has not only affected individuals, but entire cultures, institutions, and generations. In homes, the traditional family unit is under strain. Roles are blurred, responsibilities are neglected, and the concept of family as a source of strength and stability is being challenged. Many children are growing up without guidance, without structure, and without spiritual instruction. The result is a generation that is more anxious, more lost, and more disconnected than any before it. In classrooms, children are taught to question everything except the very curriculum that shapes their thinking. History is rewritten, gender is redefined, and objective reality is replaced with feelings and preferences. Educators who once focused on nurturing minds are now tasked with pushing ideologies that confuse rather than clarify. In the realm of entertainment and media, the erosion of moral standards is even more evident. Television, movies, music, and social media platforms are flooded with messages that glorify violence, perversion, greed, and rebellion. What people once avoided in secret is now consumed publicly and proudly. Celebrities and influencers have replaced mentors and role models, and fame is now achieved through shock rather than substance. This culture of sensationalism has dulled the collective conscience. People are no longer shocked by what they see or hear, and this numbness has led to a normalization of evil and a growing indifference to sin. Churches and spiritual institutions, which once stood as beacons of truth, have also been compromised in many cases. Rather than standing firm on timeless principles, some have chosen to conform to the changing culture, trading conviction for popularity and truth for relevance. The message has been watered down, the authority of Scripture undermined, and the fear of God replaced by the desire to please man. Many pulpits no longer call people to repentance or righteousness, but rather offer comfort without challenge and grace without accountability. In doing so, they have created a spiritual vacuum that leaves hearts empty and lives unchanged. The erosion is not limited to public life. It reaches deep into the personal choices of individuals. People are increasingly guided by impulse rather than wisdom, by pleasure rather than principle. The pursuit of instant gratification has taken priority over discipline, sacrifice, and long-term faithfulness. The sacredness of marriage, the value of purity, and the call to holiness are now foreign concepts to many. Spiritual disciplines like prayer, study, and worship are neglected, and God is often treated as optional, a convenience rather than the center of life. As a result, the soul suffers. A life without a moral compass is a life without direction, and a heart without spiritual foundation is easily swayed by the winds of culture. This moral decay leads to consequences that ripple across society. Where there is no standard, there is no stability. Crime increases, respect diminishes, and communities fragment. Leaders can no longer be trusted. Laws are inconsistently applied, and justice becomes selective. Without a shared understanding of right and wrong, unity becomes impossible. Division grows, conflict spreads, and peace becomes harder to find. This breakdown is not accidental. It is the result of a systematic departure from the truth. The further a society drifts from God and moral order, the more chaotic and dangerous it becomes. Even those who do not consider themselves religious can sense that something is missing. There is a hunger in people for purpose, for meaning, for something deeper than the shallow promises of the world. But that hunger is being filled with counterfeits, addiction, distraction, and deception. People are turning to technology, pleasure, and self-help instead of turning to God. The more they chase fulfillment in the wrong places, the emptier they feel. And in that emptiness, despair takes root. The erosion of moral and spiritual foundations is not just a religious concern, it is a human crisis. Every society that has ignored these truths has eventually collapsed from within. Strength does not come from wealth, power, or progress alone. It comes from character, conviction, and a connection to something greater than self. When those qualities fade, so does the strength of a nation, a community, and a person. The signs are all around us. Morality is no longer taught, faith is no longer modeled, and truth is no longer defended. Economic systems are on the brink of collapse, and the evidence is not hidden behind complicated financial jargon. It's being felt in everyday life. Prices are rising faster than wages, and the cost of living is outpacing the ability of average families to keep up. Inflation is no longer a theoretical risk, but a daily reality at the grocery store, the gas pump, and the utility bill. People are being forced to make choices between food and medicine, rent and transportation. The middle class, once the backbone of stable economies, is shrinking, while the gap between the wealthy and the poor continues to widen. Global debt has reached unprecedented levels. Nations are borrowing more than they produce, printing money without backing, and manipulating interest rates in desperate attempts to delay the inevitable. Central banks are caught in a cycle of short-term fixes that only worsen the long-term problems. The illusion of economic growth is sustained by policies that kick the can down the road, but eventually that road runs out. Major economies are entangled in dependencies. One faltering market can trigger a domino effect that destabilizes the entire system. This interconnected fragility makes the world economy highly vulnerable to sudden shocks. Stock markets are increasingly driven not by productivity or innovation, but by speculation, manipulation, and artificial stimulus. Valuations are inflated, disconnected from the true value of companies, and sustained by blind investor optimism. When this bubble bursts, it won't be a gradual correction. It will be a rapid and devastating crash. The housing market, once seen as a reliable investment, is teetering on the edge due to soaring prices, unaffordable mortgages, and rising interest rates. Home ownership is slipping out of reach for millions, and many are over-leveraged, just one crisis away from foreclosure. Supply chains that once ensured the steady flow of goods and borders have become fragile and unreliable. Shortages, delays, and increased costs are now part of everyday life. Essential goods like food, medicine, and fuel are becoming harder to access in some regions, leading to anxiety and hoarding behaviors. Local economies are suffering as small businesses are pushed out by inflation, regulation, and competition from global giants. Job security is evaporating. Automation, outsourcing, and corporate restructuring are eliminating roles faster than workers can retrain or relocate. Digital currencies and cashless economies are being promoted as the future of finance. But with them come serious concerns about privacy control and the centralization of power. Governments and institutions are gaining the ability to monitor, limit, and even freeze individual financial activity. This concentration of financial control in the hands of a few leaves citizens vulnerable to political manipulation and economic coercion. Once financial freedom is lost, it's extremely difficult to regain. Economic collapse is not just about numbers. It affects the fabric of society. When people can no longer afford the basics, civil unrest follows. Desperation drives crime, fuels conflict, and erodes trust between citizens and authorities. The psychological toll of financial stress is significant. Anxiety, depression, and family breakdown are common in households facing prolonged economic hardship. Generational wealth is being consumed just to survive, and many young adults face a future with less opportunity than their parents had. Retirement, once a secure goal, is now a distant dream for millions. Pension systems are underfunded and social safety nets are stretched thin. As economic pressures mount, people are being forced to delay major life decisions, marriage, children, education, not because they want to, but because they simply cannot afford to move forward. Corruption, mismanagement, and greed are at the root of much of this collapse. Leaders make decisions that benefit themselves and a select few, often at the expense of the majority. Banks receive bailouts while citizens lose homes. Corporations post record profits while workers face layoffs. Regulations meant to protect the public are bypassed, watered down, or ignored. This erosion of trust in financial institutions is not just a consequence of economic decline. It accelerates it. When people lose faith in the system, they stop participating in it. Savings are withdrawn, investments are halted, and consumption slows. The economy, which relies on confidence, begins to implode. Throughout history, every major civilization that neglected economic integrity eventually crumbled. Debts that cannot be repaid will not be repaid. Currencies that are overprinted will devalue. Systems built on manipulation will collapse. The global economy today is built on unstable ground. The warnings are loud, the signs are everywhere, and the consequences will not be limited to charts and graphs. They will be felt in homes, in communities, and in the lives of ordinary people trying to survive in a world where the rules are changing and the foundations are shaking. Complacency is the greatest threat to preparation. In times of growing crisis, the danger is not always found in the storm itself, but in the unwillingness to see the storm coming. Throughout history, civilizations have fallen not only because of external threats, but because of internal indifference. When people grow comfortable in the routines of daily life, they often ignore the warning signs that signal the need for change. This false sense of security lulls societies into a passive state, believing that because things have always worked a certain way, they always will. People convince themselves that the systems they trust, governments, financial institutions, healthcare, food supply chains, are unshakable. They assume that someone else is watching out for their well-being, that someone else will sound the alarm when real danger arises. But the truth is, when warning signs do appear, they are often dismissed exaggerations or conspiracy. A steady diet of entertainment, distraction, and business leaves little room for reflection or awareness. The average person is more familiar with celebrities than with economic indicators, more concerned with online trends than with geopolitical instability. This kind of complacency blinds people to the real condition of the world around them. It fosters a mindset that refuses to prepare because preparation requires effort, sacrifice, and the willingness to face uncomfortable truths. It's easier to scroll, shop, and socialize than to evaluate where things are headed and take action. In this atmosphere of indifference, even the most urgent messages fall on deaf ears. People hear them but do not respond. They see the headlines but do not change. They feel the tension but do not prepare. Complacency also spreads in communities, not just individuals. When a culture embraces convenience and ease over responsibility and resilience, it begins to lose its ability to withstand pressure. People stop thinking for themselves. They stop asking questions. They become dependent on systems that may not survive the very crisis they are ignoring. Do the right thing. Generations that have not known hardship often underestimate the speed with which life can change. They assume that food will always be on shelves, money will always be available at the bank, and peace will always be maintained by diplomacy. But these assumptions can unravel quickly when crisis strikes. The danger of complacency is compounded by deception. When voices of truth are mocked or silenced, and when those warning of collapse are labeled as alarmists, society further retreats into denial. The majority prefers soothing lies over hard truths. Leaders and media often downplay risk to avoid panic, but in doing so, they also discourage preparation. People are told to trust, to relax, to keep spending and consuming, even as the foundations beneath them are weakening. One of the most tragic effects of complacency is missed opportunity. The time to prepare is always before the crisis, not during. But by the time reality forces people to act, it is often too late to secure what they need. The shelves are empty, the banks are closed, the roads are blocked, and the systems they trusted are no longer functioning. At that point, even the best intentions and plans are useless if action was never taken. Complacency breeds vulnerability. When individuals and families fail to prepare spiritually, emotionally, and practically, they are left at the mercy of events they cannot control. Fear sets in, and with it comes desperation, confusion, and often bad decisions. The lack of readiness creates a vacuum that chaos rushes in to fill. The strong are not always those with the most resources, but those who were alert and prepared before the storm arrived. Remaining passive in the face of mounting evidence is not peace. It is neglect. Confidence without awareness is not courage. It is blindness. True security cannot be found in worldly structures. For generations, people have looked to governments, financial systems, military power, and institutions for a sense of protection and control. These systems have been built up over time with the promise of stability and support. They offer jobs, laws, health care, and protection. They create the illusion that as long as these structures are intact, life will be manageable and predictable. But history shows again and again that even the strongest empires can fall, the most powerful economies can collapse, and the most trusted institutions can fail. People place their trust in things that appear strong: bank accounts, insurance policies, political promises. corporate leaders, digital technology. But none of these can guarantee peace, safety, or purpose when the world is shaken. Money can lose its value overnight. Governments can shift in power and policy. Laws can be rewritten. Companies can dissolve. Data can be hacked. Military might can be outmaneuvered. The things that seem secure are often just temporary layers of protection that cannot withstand a deep and lasting crisis. This misplaced trust leads to disappointment. People who believed they were protected by their savings or their citizenship or their education find themselves vulnerable when circumstances suddenly change. Those who have built their lives around material success discover how fragile that success really is when it is taken away. Natural disasters, wars, pandemics, and financial collapses expose how weak our foundations can be when they are built on shifting ground. Society encourages people to invest their energy into these external systems. They are taught to chase credentials, accumulate wealth, climb the ladder of success, and follow popular narratives. But in times of real testing, none of these things can shield the soul from fear, anxiety, or loss. True security cannot come from something that can be taken away. Real peace is not found in possessions, status, or influence. It is not rooted in the ability to predict or control what happens next. It is found in something deeper, something unchanging. When people rely solely on the visible, they lose connection with the invisible strength that sustains life during adversity. Spiritual grounding becomes an afterthought, yet it is the only foundation that endures. The storms of life reveal where people have placed their trust. If that trust is in a system, it will be tested. If that trust is in an idea, it will be shaken. If that trust is in another person, it will eventually be disappointed. Only when trust is placed in something eternal, something greater than circumstances, can it withstand the trials that inevitably come. Communities built on worldly structures are also vulnerable. Cities with towering buildings and modern infrastructure can still fall into chaos when leadership fails or when moral decay rots the core of society. Innovation and progress are not enough to preserve unity or justice. Nations that forget the source of true strength often crumble from within. Power without principle becomes oppression. Wealth without wisdom becomes corruption. Advancement without character leads to ruin. In times of crisis, people instinctively search for something solid. They want to know that there is a place of refuge, that there is a truth that does not change, that there is a purpose beyond survival. When the foundations of society begin to shake, it becomes clear that the only real security is found in something that cannot be bought, cannot be legislated, and cannot be destroyed. That kind of security is not dependent on headlines, market trends, or political speeches. It does not come and go with the news cycle. The pursuit of lasting security requires a different kind of vision. It means stepping back from the noise and looking honestly at the world's condition. It means acknowledging that no system or institution, no matter how advanced or well-funded, can replace the need for inner strength and moral clarity. It means recognizing that external comfort is not the same as internal peace. And it means making the conscious choice to anchor life to something that does not shift with the winds of culture or the tides of crisis. Urgency is not panic, it's wisdom in the face of warning. There is a crucial difference between fear-driven reaction and truth-driven readiness. Panic causes people to act irrationally, to scatter without direction, to make decisions based on emotion rather than understanding. Urgency, on the other hand, is born from awareness. It sees the danger clearly, measures its weight, and responds with purpose. It is not loud or chaotic, but quiet and focused. It is not a product of fear, but of discernment. It takes responsibility and does not wait for someone else to act first. In today's world, where the signs of collapse are multiplying, urgency is no longer optional. It is essential. But many have been conditioned to ignore urgency, to label it as alarmist or extreme. They are told to relax, trust the system, keep consuming, keep scrolling, keep laughing as though nothing is happening. But beneath the surface, they feel it. They see the tension in global affairs, the erosion of moral standards, the instability in economies, the rising conflict in communities. Yet, because the world is wrapped in distraction, the impulse to act is delayed or dismissed. Wisdom calls for action before the storm arrives. It does not wait until shelves are empty, until banks are closed, until the power goes out. It does not wait for the media to confirm what has already been seen and felt. The wise prepare not because they are afraid, but because they understand that waiting too long removes choices. Urgency allows time to think, to pray, to plan, and to protect what matters most. It is a gift, not a burden. It sharpens the mind, strengthens the heart, and prepares the spirit. This kind of urgency is rooted in clarity. It knows that everything that looks strong on the outside may be fragile within. It recognizes that peace in society does not always mean peace in the soul. It sees through the illusion of safety created by wealth, technology, or social order. It understands that what is celebrated today may be condemned tomorrow, and what is available today may vanish overnight. Urgency pays attention to history, to patterns, to the slow but steady drift of nations away from truth. It listens to the still, small voice that says, "Get ready." Real urgency also prepares others. It does not stay silent while loved ones drift in complacency. It speaks with compassion, not arrogance. It reaches out, not to frighten, but to awaken. It shares the burden of watchfulness, calling families, communities, and even strangers to open their eyes. It is not about hoarding or hiding. It is about helping others recognize the signs, ask the hard questions, and seek what truly matters. It is about creating a circle of awareness that multiplies wisdom and courage in the face of confusion. Urgency builds resilience. It encourages people to simplify, to declutter, to focus on what will endure. It teaches them to let go of false security and to anchor themselves in truth. It shows them how to prepare practically and spiritually. It moves them to reconcile broken relationships, to strengthen their inner life, to develop the skills and habits that create peace under pressure. It reminds them that the greatest strength is not in avoiding the storm, but in being ready when it comes. There is a narrow window in which urgency can still be a choice, rather than a reaction forced by circumstances. In that window, action matters more than words. The time to decide what is important, what is eternal, and what is worth holding on to is now. Wisdom does not panic, but it does move. It moves with purpose, with clarity, and with unwavering resolve. It does not wait for approval or consensus. It acts because it knows that the longer one delays, the fewer the options become.